Again, good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to the regular Committee of the Whole meeting for Wednesday, April 26, 2023. My name's Ian Morrison. I will be chairing today's meeting. I'd like to acknowledge that we're gathered in the territory of the Coast Salish people and acknowledge their stewardship and care of the lands over the millennia. I look to the agenda today. Ms. Mohan, item 1.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Item 1 is just approval of the agenda. Looking for a motion to approve the agenda.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed. The motion carries. Item 2.
Just before going on to item 2, there's a number of directors who they are not muted on their computers. So if everybody could just check their computers and make sure they're muted on their computers, that would be great. And then going on to item 2 on the agenda, which is the adoption of the minutes of the Committee of the Whole meeting of April 12th, 2023.
Moved by Director Stone, seconded by Director Manhouse. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Are there any opposed? None opposed, the motion carries. Item 3, business arising.
Yes, item 3 is business arising from the minutes.
Go ahead, Director Markman.
Thank you. I noticed under the minutes, under D1, that there was a motion to have the agricultural coordinator position have a staff report brought back to this meeting. Just wondering if you can have an update on that, because it's not on the agenda.
Mr. O'Riordan.
Through the chair, thank you for the question. Staff were waiting on a couple of items to inform that staff report, specifically deliverables for the implementation of that, and that we have received that, so it should be on the next agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. O'Riordan. Next item.
If there's no other business arising from the minutes, then we will move on to public input period.
Do we have anybody registered online?
Just let me quickly check. There's a couple of participants. No, nobody online.
I'd like to invite anyone in the gallery if they'd like to provide input on today's agenda items. I see no one stirring. Next item, Ms. Mohan.
So the next item is correspondence, and then there's no correspondence information. There's no information, and then we're on to item number 8, which is reports. And the first report, R1, is a report from the Community Services Department regarding the Sport Tourism Event Grant Subcommittee with a series of recommendations for the board's consideration.
Welcome, Mr. Elzinga. And given we were just discussing the makeup of this organization a little while ago, you moved very quickly.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm available to the committee this morning on any questions regarding process or format, but I do want to thank Alternate Director Istash, who is one of the members of the actual subcommittee, and he may be able to answer any committee questions regarding the deliberations and grant amounts.
Alternate Director Istash.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, it was a good meeting. Lots went over there. What I'd like to highlight is the diversity of the type of events and activities. A wide swath from cycling to boats to regattas to lacrosse, hockey. Most ones I want to point out in there, though, were the much like Penelakut built their new soccer fields, Stamanis is currently building their soccer field. And this is going to be a nice support to hopefully their grand opening of that new facility. And as well, the number 2 item to be pointed out there was that it's for the Coetson canoe races coming up. With the requirements of how the grant works, you have to be a nonprofit society, and it was a private business coming in asking for it. The board felt, the committee felt it was important to put a placeholder in the funds for the importance of the event in hope that they can get their nonprofit status in time, because in the recommendation of the committee work was that they try to seek that. So just wanted to highlight that, and then also I wanted to thank Vicki and Karen for the good work they did. It was We get a lot of reports at councils and here, but their report that they provided and their metrics and the whole process, I just wanted to acknowledge staff on the great report that they provided the committee to make the good decisions.
Thank you. Look to any further questions for staff. Director Acton.
Yeah, my question was around that conditional grant. Is that, well, so you're saying the committee, that's what the committee wanted, but is that, it's not a policy for us,
Mr. Elzinga.
is it?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through to Director Acton, and perhaps with the assistance of Ms. Mohan, it's my understanding from the Local Government Act that we cannot grant funds to businesses, and therefore, we wanted to support this event, or the committee wanted to support the event, but that was a consideration, and so if they changed their model, then perhaps we could provide some funding.
That's my understanding as well. Any further questions for staff? Director Stone, would you like to move this resolution? Is there a seconder? Moved and seconded. Any discussion on the item? Seeing none, all those in favor? Any opposed? Not opposed, the motion carries. Ms. Mohan, R2.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. R2 is a report from the General Manager, Community Services Department regarding recreation fees and charges policy, ice arenas, and 2023 to 2025 fee schedule.
Mr. Elzinga.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And typically, as the committee knows, fees and charges are originally discussed at commissions, but because of the nature of this report, an attempt at harmonization, we thought it appropriate to bring to the committee of the whole. I would like to thank the assistance of 3 of the division managers in the organization. So Kim Little at South Cowichan Recreation, Rob Williams at the Cowichan Community Center, and Denise Williams at Cowichan Lake Recreation are here today. Thanks for their assistance. They're available to answer any specific questions to their functions. But I'm here to basically present the report and answer any principal questions. And there's one thing that I'd like to bring forward first. In some of the clarification questions I've received from members of the committee, one stands out, and that's about the seniors rate. And so I've had some inquiries around the seniors rate. If the committee chose to approve the recommendations as presented, staff could certainly look at the inclusion of a discounted seniors rate. The time sensitivity around this in our normal work cycle is that we're putting forward requests to user groups for the upcoming season, minor hockey, junior hockey, et cetera. And so they typically want to know how much they're going to be charged. And so that's why the time sensitivity, the letters would be going out here shortly. So the ice rental piece is more time sensitive than some of the public admission fees. And back to the seniors rate, it could be included with a separate motion if that was the will of the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Elzinga. I have Director Stone, Acton, myself, and alternate Director Salmon. Director Stone.
And I think you may have addressed this in your comments, Mr. Elzinga, but the urgency of having this done, like when I saw the report, I thought, based on what you've said as well, confirms that this is typically kind of flows through the recreation commissions and then comes to the board. And I know that in past sort of fee schedules, there was a lot of contemplation, and it is contemplated here about, sort of Cowichan Lake Recreation and the distance out there and their desire to attract more users through a lower fee schedule. Here it says 95%. I guess the question is, and you may have also just addressed it more, is the urgency of this versus focusing on getting the governance stood up to be able to run these kinds of things through the sub-regional commissions so that that advice can be received by the board before adopting new fee schedules. I think it would be remiss if we adopted new fee schedules and then that had an impact in the sort of sub-regional facilities that wasn't contemplated because we didn't have that feedback or input.
Mr. Elzinga.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through to Director Stone. So all great points. And so staff saw the opportunity to move forward the policy piece. And I do want to be clear, this is completely separate from the governance piece and the path we're on to be doing that. And 2023 is a real transition year for us in terms of making decisions on all of that. So we looked at this, said there is the opportunity to start harmonizing. We've had 3 or 4 meetings to discuss the rates and the principles, et cetera, and potentially bring it forward to the committee. If the committee does not want to move it forward, the alternative is we would be taking it back to commissions with potentially no harmonization in 2023 and bringing it back in 2024 with a harmonization format.
Director Acton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I noticed that Lake Cowichan is suggesting a lower rate. And as a mother of 3 boys who played hockey and dealing with hockey managers, I know for a fact that a hockey manager will book a rink that costs $5 less and send 20 cars to 20 parents to the rink. And I think at this table, we don't actually have a lot of opportunities to affect our emissions. So by supporting that, I think we're doing a disservice. We are sending large amounts of traffic to Lake Cowichan over $5. So I think it's, they should be closer to the same price so that, or the same price, so that that kind of thing doesn't happen.
Mr. Elzinga.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through Director Acton. Again, great points. Full transparency, so we looked at some of these principles through the lens of existing rates. And so if the Cowichan Lake recreation rates were at 100% of the other arenas, it would be a significant increase on all user groups in the Cowichan Lake area. So I want to put that out there that we had to look at existing rates along with the principles around that. So we originally contemplated 90% for Cowichan Lake recreation. We landed on 95%. If the committee thought it should be 100% to be even, it just, I'm bringing to your attention, it would be a significant increase.
Follow up.
Can you clarify user groups? Because my guess would be that the rink, ice time goes to probably 1/3 to hockey. And so you're trucking out maybe players, maybe the adult players aren't thinking that way, but you're trucking out all these kids to go an hour, let's say from Kerry Park instead, to save $5, an hour one way and then an hour another way almost, or 45 minutes. So it's, yeah, those outside user groups.
Mr. Elzinga.
Mr. Chair, through the Director Acton, I'm going to ask my team here for assistance in some guesstimates on how much minor hockey has of the percentage of use. Anybody want to?
Thanks. I don't know the exact percentages, but I don't believe that this would change who is booking now. So right now, minor hockey from Lake Cowichan has most of the ice, and then a little bit from the central Cowichan Valley minor hockey. So I don't expect that it'll change much. It's more based on availability of the ice. That's how we see it getting booked. And so I'm not sure that, I don't know the percentages of that, but, anyone? No, so.
Thank you. I actually got myself and alternate Director Salmon, but I'll yield and let Director Salmon go first.
Yeah, thank you. Just to pick up on the seniors rate issue, and I know Director Segal was interested in this, but I do know, I think most rec centers on the island do have a seniors rate, so I would just like to move that staff be directed to include a seniors rate in the proposed framework. And if I can get a second, I'll speak a bit more.
Seconded, please proceed.
So, actually, I don't need to speak a bit more, but I think I'll let Mr. Elzinga respond if you'd like.
Well, technically, when we have a motion on the floor, we don't go to staff for more discussion. It's now on the floor for the directors to discuss. But I'll go ahead, Mr. Elzing. I thought you'd introduced this earlier.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I do want to reinforce Alternate Director Salmon's point that most facilities on the island do have a seniors rate. And again, staff would be certainly open to supporting this motion.
Sorry, I'm just reviewing, so that's addition to the resolution that we have. Hang on.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. All right, any further discussion on this? Do we have something that we can sink our teeth into in the form of, in writing,
So,
or?
yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have anything in writing in front of me. Director Salmon, if you want to maybe restate your motion, and then, just a reminder, the main motion hasn't been moved yet. So if you want to, slowly express your motion, and I'll note it down, and then you folks can vote on it, and then we can move on to the main motion of the recommendations.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
Okay, thank you. So that staff be directed to include a seniors rate within the fee policy framework that's proposed.
Mr. Elzinga?
Mr. Chair, as a friendly suggestion, could we use the word admission in there? So a senior's admission rate to separate it from an ICE rental as part of this discussion.
That makes a lot of sense to me.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll call the question on that item. All those in favor? Any opposed? None opposed, the motion carries. That concludes your remarks.
Follow up, but on a
Please
different,
proceed.
just another question, just on the software for booking for family skates. Is there any chance that that could be made available online?
Mr. Elzinga?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, through to Alternate Director Salmon. So there has been some questions around the software capabilities to book and to cancel bookings for public skating admissions. Currently, our recreation software does not have that capability. We've asked our supplier to add that capability, but that's going to take a little bit of time. So we would hope for that for the 2024 season.
All right, my turn. Mr. Elzinga. I read this report with interest, and I guess I was even a little surprised to see it. I guess my first question is this integral to this year in the regional recreation format as far as proceeding and the rationalization of these fees? And the either or, if we don't, what happens?
So, Mr. Chair, in a word, no. So staff saw an opportunity, and we had some meetings to discuss the fees and charges harmonization. And so is it necessary to go forward to assist with the regional recreation? No, but it is something that we would be looking for at some point. And so if the committee again decides to push this to 2024, the alternate is that at the next Recreation Commission meetings for the Couch Community Center, South Couch and Recreation, or Couch and Lake Recreation, they would be bringing forward their own independent fee recommendations. They'd probably be a lot in line with this, but it would be up to your commissions, and you may have different directions coming forward.
So thank you for that, because I'm just going to share my experience over the years with serving at Couch and Lake Rec, and fees and charges have always been a very interesting and animated discussion. And I think that I'd feel a lot more comfortable with this as the basis for the discussion at the commissions, as opposed to proceeding with this now and then going back and saying, the board's decided this is what we're going to be doing. There's been some discussion in the past for we'll call it competitive advantage purposes of does one arena keep their ice in a little bit longer so that they can attract a little bit more business, or put their ice in early as a result of trying to attract hockey schools and the likes. And that little bit of difference it's recommended 95, you said 90 was on the table. What does 85 look like? Because I don't want to see, probably one of our nicest facilities, all of a sudden slowly diminishing in the use of the facility because it's exactly the same price as all the rest of the facilities. So these are some of the concerns, but I think the biggest concern is that we will be seen to be getting ahead of the folks that we're asking for advice and advising us on this. So, I looked at committee. That's my personal view. I think that a discussion at the commissions makes a lot of sense. I think based on this document makes a lot of sense. And if there isn't a significant impact on the overall operations of our facilities, then, I would like to see us go in that direction. Go back to the folks that we tasked to advise us and hear what they have to say. Mr. Elzinga.
Mr. Chair, if I can just give an additional piece of information, I appreciate all of that. And fees and charges has always been a little gray in whose authority determines the fees and charges. If the desire of the committee is to send this back to the commissions, it will not be coming back to the committee or the board for the 2023-2024 season. And you're allowing the commissions to actually make the decision on what the fees schedule is going to be for next season. So there would be no attempt to come back at this point. It would be a decision of the commissions.
Mr. Elzinga, and maybe I'll turn to Ms. Mohan, our CAO. We can certainly direct it to the commissions. And I understand the timeliness of it, and I'm comfortable with the decision-making of the commissions. But we can certainly have any recommendations that they're going to make around fees come back to us, whether or not it's a fait accompli at that point or not. Correct?
So, Mr. Chair, my concern with coming back to the committee and the board is timeline. You don't have a committee of the whole or board on May the 24th. Your next opportunity after some of these commission meetings is June the 14th, which is really behind in putting out letters to user groups for the upcoming season. So there's a timeline issue there. I also want to bring to your attention that it is within some commission bylaws that you have delegated the authority already to them for fees and charges. Kerry Park Recreation Center is an example where it specifically says in their bylaw they will be determining fees and charges.
Thank you for that. Director Acton.
I feel like I'm not going to support a referral here. There's already been a lot of work done on this, and most of us sit on those commissions, so we're going to go back, advise ourselves, and then bring it back to advise ourselves. So I'm going to support this in principle. I'd rather see all of the rinks some exact consistency to avoid what I already mentioned, but because I do know for a fact that we drove a lot to other areas, even Fuller Lake, to save $5, 20 cars, both ways. So I think that would, anyway, I'll get off of that soapbox, and I don't think we should be sending staff back around to do more work. It is where it's at right now, and I'll be supporting it.
Ms. Mohan, I neglected to go to you, and you looked like you had something to share.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I defer to Mr. Elzinga for the conversation around, sending it back to commission and what the repercussions of that would be. I think my concern at this point is just that you've passed a motion also to include a senior's admission rate. And so the main recommendation that is now in front of the board for consideration gets a little blurry, because if you're going to approve the policy and the seniors rate's not in it, then is the intent for the policy to go back and be revised and be brought back here? And then I would defer to Mr. Elzinga about what the impacts of that might be versus making a revision on seniors rates to come back at a later date. That was really my question. So.
Mr. Elzinga, your thoughts?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that it can be done either way. So if the committee refers this back to commissions, the commissions will include a senior rate in their report that goes to the commission. If the committee decides today, obviously, to include the rate structure as presented, we'll include the seniors rate. So I think it can happen either way.
Thanks for that. And Director Nicholson.
I'm probably confused at this point because I'm not thinking very clearly, but from my perspective, we've gone down this road of regional recreation, and there's a lot of benefit from really thinking about our provision of recreational services on a regional basis and how much things cost and what service levels we're able to provide moving into the future, because things are changing and costs are rising and all sorts of things. And while the commissions will provide really important advice, but it strikes me that this whole conversation should be more about the fees and charges. What kind of percentage of the cost of providing the services are they covering, and should there be a target for regionally that we should be expecting? And we haven't had that conversation, and I just think this is an interim year. We should just go with what we have, and maybe staff will make sure that those kind of policy issues are discussed by the commission and moving forward. But I really don't want to see, I agree with Director Acton on her point, and I don't want to see ice rinks competing against one another. That just doesn't seem in the spirit of regional recreation. Maybe I'm confused.
Director Stone.
Maybe we're all a little confused today because I feel the same way. But I just threw to Mr. Elzinga, you mentioned that the current bylaw, it's Kerry Park Recreation Commission establishes and determines their own fees and charges? Was that what I heard?
Mr. Chair, through to Director Stone, see if I can clarify. So the actual Kerry Park Recreation Center Commission bylaw, which identifies membership term, processes, talks about their powers and responsibilities, and within their powers and responsibilities in the commission bylaw is the ability to set fees and charges.
So with that bylaw still in effect, would this recommendation not sort of usurp those powers?
Mr. Elzinga.
Oh, or is that captured in here, that's what the Kerry Park amounts are already recommended in this fee schedule change?
Mr. Elzinga.
So, Mr. Chair, that is certainly one way to look at it. Yes, just to reinforce that we use the Kerry Park Commission recommendation for a 2% increase to adult primetime ice rentals as the basis of this fee schedule. So that's following up on a Kerry Park Commission fees and charges decision as the basis of this entire framework. So that hopefully addresses that issue. Again, we are in this transition. You're obviously correct, Director Stone. We haven't changed the governance, and so we haven't changed the commission bylaw. That's certainly a valid point.
So enough just to
Follow up?
yeah, more of a comment than a question, but it just felt to me like this was a cart in front of the horse. But I also recognize that, at our municipal tables, annual reflections on fees and charges across the board, whether it's Parks Rec, other fees and charges, come back every year for approval, driven by staff's analysis on, cost recovery and et cetera. And that's what this looks like to me. It was just in this context of this evolving regional recreation implementation. I was just hoping this would all flow from this new governance piece, but, so, yeah, I'm still confused, but hey, it's only Wednesday morning. Thanks.
Alternate Director Ishtas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to echo Director Acton's comment. I serve on the Couch and Community Commission, and the consensus of that board is that we have faith in staff, and when staff bring forward a report, there's a reason for it, and we should support the talented staff we have. So I think it would just go back there, and it would just be making a redundant circle coming back to this board. So with the addition of the seniors user fee, I'd be happy to, have we now, for clarity, do we need to make the motion to approve this, or is that what alternate Sam?
There's no motion on the floor. We're still having discussion. And
Okay.
I'll entertain a motion when the discussion's finished. Unless you really want to make it now.
Well, I just wanted to if the time is correct, to make the motion to approve this with
You could
the
certainly,
understanding that the senior user fee will be reflective. I'd like to put the motion on the floor, and as such, echo what Director Atkinen said.
moved and seconded. Any comments? I have one. So I'm a little reluctant, or very reluctant, because the setting of fees and charges has been the purview of the Couch and Lake Recreation Commission for a number of years. Obviously, we're in a new era and we're moving forward. I'm really saddened that one of the very first things that we'll do is say, we're not seeking your advice on fees and charges as a new commission, or as a new regional recreation format. And that's part of the rationale for, we haven't had this discussion, apparently CCC has, and I guess Kerry Park has. I don't know that that's something, that's not the first step and the foot I want to start off on with our new commission and our new governance structure. So I won't be supporting it, but we'll go with what the will of the committee is. Any further discussion? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Those opposed? 2 opposed, motion carries. And it is as amended with the seniors rate. Next item is Mohan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The next item is R3, report from the Economic Development Division regarding workforce housing strategy scope. And this report is for information.
Mr. O'Riordan.
Good morning, Chair and Directors. Thank you for taking this item. The purpose of today's report is to provide an update on the workforce housing strategy. And the purpose of that strategy is to identify actions for increasing housing availability and affordability for the labor force that can be implemented by local government, nonprofits, and industry. So we recognized within this report that there's a lot of work already underway around the region, local governments. And it's our attempt to understand the full scope of the housing issues related in the context of the work that's already underway, and then apply our limited resources to where that can be most beneficial to support the workforce. So the scope of work presented today is what we feel would be the best use of resources to support identify solutions for the region. Our consultant, Jada Bassi, is here today attending virtually, who will be able to present on the scope, to initiate discussions with the board, to further understand where the political will and interest is around this subject. And yeah, we look forward to the discussions afterwards, but first I'll hand it over to Jada for a presentation. Thank you.
Welcome, Jada. You're on screen. You have a presentation for us.
I do, yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I will share my screen.
And welcome.
Okay, Mr. Chair, I just want to confirm that you're able to see this. Yeah, I'm
Yes.
seeing some nods. Okay. All right, thank you. Well, good morning, Mr. Chair and directors, and thank you for inviting me today to speak to you on the workforce housing strategy. I'm with City Spaces Consulting, and we've been working very closely with CBRD staff, particularly Brittany and Barry from Economic Development, on this workforce housing strategy process. From my understanding, the committee has already received a bit of an introduction on workforce housing, the strategy and the process. So what I'm going to cover today is just to give a bit of a reminder of the overview of the project, but then really focus in on our framework for strategy development. We're still in early days of what the strategy areas of focus are, so it'd be very helpful to receive your input and any suggestions, because we still have time to shape how this is going to unfold in the subsequent work plan. And then I'll share with you our next steps. So project overview. Why are we undertaking a workforce housing strategy? So based on a lot of the recent initiatives and studies, such as the Regional Housing Needs Report, we have learned that we are falling short on delivering new housing units in the region, and this is directly impacting the labor market. So the number of units that we're looking for are nearly 1,000 units per year. However, we're delivering about 460 new units per year. So that's a shortfall of approximately 531 units per year. And this shortfall, if we think cumulatively year after year, is contributing to market pressures. And that's resulting in things such as a shortage of rental housing and increasing of prices of housing. Housing costs are also misaligned with regional wages. So as we're seeing the costs of renting and buying increase, we're not seeing wages increase at that same rate. So the ability for households to afford housing is getting more and more challenging. Patterns we've observed include households relocating to where housing is available rather than where they prefer to be. So locating further from work and having to commute more for their jobs, adding to transportation and congestion challenges. Job vacancy rate has also increased recently from 3.3 to 5.9%. And what we've heard from businesses and employers is they're having a hard time filling those vacancy roles because those candidates are having a hard time finding housing. And they're also having a hard time retaining those workers and keeping those jobs filled because of housing and the issue with wages. So in summary, the labor shortage is really impacting businesses, and it's related to those housing challenges. So why we're doing a workforce housing strategy is to identify a collaborative and regional solution to workforce housing, to identify potential solutions to attract and retain staff within various industries, and to also foster sustainable economic growth in the Cowichan region. The scope here is really focused on the workforce, and as such, we're not intending to duplicate or encroach on other initiatives or maybe other policies and plans that have already been adopted. For example, there's already an attainable housing strategy for the Cowichan region, which looks at non-market to market housing. We're really looking to zoom in on addressing the needs of workers and their housing needs of workers so that we can have a very sustainable and thriving economy. Our process is 5 phases. Phase 1 was our initiation, where we did some background review, created an engagement strategy. Phase 2, which we undertook in January and February, was where we had our first round of engagement with builders, developers, businesses, the public, really looking at a broad range of issues and opportunities from their perspective on workforce housing. And since then, we've created a framework, which I'll share a few slides on what that framework is. We're now in the stage of phase 3, where we're going to be doing additional engagement, but really zooming in on some core strategy areas based on data that we've researched and what we've heard so far. After that, we'll be knitting solutions together and drafting a strategy. That strategy will be shared with people we've engaged with so far, so they can provide input and feedback and give us their read of level of support on those strategies, and then we'll fine tune it and have it ready to launch as a final phase. Okay, moving into our framework. So based on the research and some of the data that we looked at, as well as what we heard, there's a lot of positive things that are already occurring at the region. I think it's really worth noting that isn't necessarily a problem, but it's something that we can work with. So from our observation, the region's already made positive progress on addressing housing need for the workforce. There's existing policies, plans, initiatives in motion. You know, a lot of other regions I work with, they're not as far along as the Cowichan region, so that's a really good thing. There's also a very strong appetite from the development industry to roll up their sleeves and get moving, and even trying some new areas of practice and construction techniques. So this is also a positive. And there's a healthy curiosity from all sectors in the public to explore more solutions. So I think we've been given the green light from our earlier engagement to really go down and look at some new alternatives. So while there's already these good policies and plans and initiatives in motion, there is still a large magnitude of housing need that's being fueled by rapid change, and the collective capacity for all the sectors to respond to this need is quite great. So the strategies we're looking at is one, to even help address some of those capacity issues. And other challenges that I'm sure you're familiar with is there are development constraints limiting construction activity, things like infrastructure, water servicing. And at the end of the day, this is impacting the viability of businesses and to fill their positions given the housing challenges. One question we asked people in our first round of engagement is, who is the workforce? The intention here is to make sure that we have a very clear idea of who we're targeting with this workforce strategy and who is intended to benefit from this. And as it turns out, we couldn't define it in one clear box. There's actually a bit of an arc to it. So to share with you what we came away with is there is the aspect of transitioning into the workforce. So people who are students and they're training and they're going to be looking for their job. There's also active workers in existing industries and expanding industries, so healthcare, construction, etc. And there's also those who are transitioning out of the workforce, semi-retired and retired. So what we heard from people that we engaged with is to ensure that this is inclusive of the workforce and recognizing there are diverse needs in a given lifetime of workers and their housing needs during those changes of their life. One thing that's also important if we're going to be looking at delivering housing product at the end of the day, ensuring that it is affordable to those households that we would consider workers. So we've done an exercise to define this workforce wage spectrum in the Cowichan region. We have 4 categories: minimum wage, living wage, median wage, and moderate to high income earners. From my point of view, all job categories contribute equally to Cowichan's socioeconomic ecosystem. But one thing to recognize is that some groups have more spending power than others. And this is something we want to consider as we're developing strategies to make sure we have housing for these different groups. I'll quickly go through these next couple of slides. One thing that we learned from engagement is that there were so many issues that were identified by participants, an overwhelming number of them. However, many of those issues are already being addressed by a process or procedure. For example, local area plans or the development approvals process. So in my mind, I don't want this strategy to put forward any recommendations that are already in motion. We want to deliver something that's complementary and building off the work that's already done. So it is interesting to note that. And also recognizing there were a lot of issues that were related to housing but are really out of scope of what we're looking at here. So things like global economic conditions. So the last month or two, we've been doing a bit of an editing exercise. How do we narrow down all of these issues that are, been put on the table by people we engaged with so that we can narrow it down to what is the most important? So one exercise we did was engage with a project advisory group, trying to understand all the different layers that could potentially initiate transformation. So we utilized this diagram with that project advisory group, and it was a really helpful exercise to understand where we want to pinpoint. And they also added to the layers, they added things like capacity. So that was a thread that we decided to work on. But the point is that we might not want to address everything. We want to zoom in on those core issues that are going to have the biggest impact rather than trying to address everything that was initially identified early on. So we've gone through a bit of an editing exercise. To wrap up the framework, we do have a working vision statement. And at this time, it is the Cowichan region offers housing choices for workers at all income levels and at all stages of their vocations. So after going through our editing exercise, trying to narrow down the scope, recognizing there's already good initiatives and we want to have really high impact, we are now exploring 4 overarching strategies. So 1, to create regional workforce housing policy guidelines. 2, to seek accelerated housing solutions. 3, consider short-term vacation rental regulations. And 4, establish a housing authority. So these are all in exploratory stages. We've identified them, and really our next step is to do some more research, look at some evidence and data to help with the rationale, undertake engagement in May to understand if this is applicable and palatable, and understanding how realistic it is to move things forward, and then seeing how we can weave that into a strategy. So I'll briefly share a little bit about each of these, and then I'll wrap up my presentation for questions. So in terms of the regional workforce housing policy guidelines, we're really looking at potentially a package of tools that can be implemented at the regional level that effectively would complement a lot of the initiatives happening at the local level. So this can be best practices on housing typologies, tools, processes, maybe construction techniques. And the idea is we want to be moving workforce housing projects from idea to built and occupied, and ensuring we're creating an enabling environment from a policy point of view to support those initiatives moving forward at the regional level. For accelerated housing solutions, the intent here is to address what is a typical process. So a common path to creating a workforce housing project typically takes 3 to 4 years to build it and get it occupied. So we want to find ways that we can accelerate that, get units available faster. And so some of the things that we're looking at are different tools and practices, potentially temporary use permits, maybe modular housing construction. So there are some tools that we're going to be looking at here and testing those out. Short-term vacation rental regulations. This is quite an important one for the regional level, given that a number of the rental housing supply is being diverted from long-term residents and the workforce for more short-term. So we're going to be exploring some of those regulatory opportunities and also engaging with key stakeholders on the benefits of this, and maybe also some potential impacts, and bringing that up with our analysis as well. And lastly, we are exploring the opportunity of a housing authority. So one broad regional entity that could really put the Cowichan region in a position to deliver units that are in good alignment with the mandate of the regional district and to address workforce housing needs, and also to be in a good position to receive senior level government funding, which authorities tend to be more of a magnet for that kind of work. I can go into this a bit more detail if you have questions about it, but basically an authority is an independent, municipally owned agency that oversees the development and management of workforce housing and projects. Sometimes you hear the word housing corporation, which that is operates more at an arm's length. So there are different models in which this can be delivered, where there's more involvement from regional board and council and staff, or less involvement. So that is going to be part of the exercise that we're going to be exploring here is what is a potential structure, models, funding, and partnerships, and what makes the most sense for the Cowichan region. Is there an opportunity to bring in First Nations partners and help them with capacity and deliver units there, for example? And also we've been having a close conversation with the Cowichan Housing Association, the executive directors on our project team. And so we're curious how their association and this authority, exploring this opportunity together. All right, to summarize, we're going to be exploring these 4 overarching strategies. We have targeted engagements in the coming month, and basically we're going to be looking at getting some input on potential application of these strategies in the region, gauge level of support, and really try to understand anticipated opportunities and challenges to implementing some of these strategies and their impact. Okay, to wrap up, next steps, our phase 2 engagement is coming up in early May. I should also mention that we have a concurrent engagement with some organizations related to the municipal and regional district tax, as there is an opportunity to explore funding there related to workforce housing. So we're looking into that. We'll summarize what we heard and work closely with staff to refine the scope and finalize the framework. And then we'll be moving into drafting the strategy and putting more detail behind all of that. And with that, I'll stop sharing my screen, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much for that, Jada. Thank you for lowering your screen. I've got a whole bunch of hands up around the room, and I've got Director Justice first, so go ahead, and everybody else keep your hands up, please.
Right, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the presentation. Not really a question, but a comment. I guess that despite the efforts that have obviously been made to narrow the scope of the project and to distinguish between workforce housing and affordable housing generally, I still think that maybe it seems too sort of ambitious or too broad a scope. And I mean, as acknowledged in the last time we discussed this, there isn't enough housing generally, not just for workers. And I think the way that workers has been redefined in this latest iteration, including both aspiring workers and retiring workers, sort of emphasizes that point. I really think there's not much need to, and possibly some peril in duplicating the work that's already been done in attainable housing throughout the region. So I guess my suggestion would be to focus on narrowing the focus of the project to support particular segments of the workforce, and I'm thinking about temporary workers primarily, things like temporary contract workers who are coming in to build the hospital and that other big projects, seasonal workers for the tourism industry, and temporary farm labor. I mean, that would be a good place to begin, at least. I think housing such workers is pretty important and obviously affects housing availability in the rest of the region on a seasonal basis or longer. It's not really a focus of previous work on attainable housing, so it would be complementary to that work instead of competing with or undermining. Thanks.
Thank you for that. Before we get a response, I'd like to remind everyone, 4 to 6 inches from your microphone is ideal for everybody to hear. So any, Mr. O'Riordan or Ms. Bessie, do you want to respond to that?
Maybe I'll jump in and let Jada jump in after. Yeah, I think, those are fair comments. We do understand within this work that the housing crisis is hitting some sectors of the economy and some workers more significantly than others in terms of their ability to pay for housing. I think what we've done so far in the analysis is to break out the segmentation of different types of workers. So we have that like minimum wage to living wage to median wage, and those and so far going up, and those categories generally correlate with specific sectors within the economy. And we are also aware of where the vacancy rates are within those specific sectors. So while you don't maybe necessarily see it here other than a reference to those, we do feel significant value, and we'll be looking for ways to have the primary focus be where the biggest need are within the region, which would be for those who are at the lower end of that scale. Jada, do you want to add anything?
I think that's a good summary. The only thing I will add is that our intention when we produce a strategy, the report, every single strategy, I would like to relate it back to demonstrated need. And exactly, Director Justice, as you've identified, is who would benefit from this. So would it be seasonal workers? Would it be hospital workers, construction, temporary, long-term? I think it would be good to demonstrate that relationship because it also speaks to the spirit of the strategy and the intention. And we want to say, what are our desired outcomes, right? Our desired outcomes are, for example, reduce the job vacancy rate in these particular job categories. Is one of the ways that we're thinking about this. So I appreciate your comment.
Thank you. And I just want to do a quick check-in on our speakers list. I've got Directors Deck, Martman, Douglas, Manhas, Salmon, Wilson, myself, and Stone. Anyone that I've missed? Director Acton, we'll throw you in there. And sorry, everyone, I was going this way around the room, so that's just the way it worked out. We'll go to Director Deck next. Oh, and just very quickly, we do have a closed session scheduled at 12:30, so that's 40 some odd minutes from now, so keep that in mind.
Thank you for this. Thanks, Mr. Chair. I'm just wondering, if you feel the need for rentals is greater than the need for homes to buy, and I guess it's kind of based on the jobs that are available and the wages that are paid, but do you get a sense yet about what's needed most?
Thank you, Director Deck. Looking at the Regional Housing Needs Report, there is a greater need for rental housing in Cowichan Region in general, particularly 2-bedroom units from my understanding, but there is also a need for ownership. And if we're looking at tying this to the workforce, there are those different income groups. So the minimum wage and living wage folks, they're more likely going to need something that's a rental. But also if we're looking to attract those with higher wages, so very specialized skills in professional services or in different types of like healthcare, like doctors and nurses, they might need rental if they're moving to the Cowichan region, but they might also be looking for something more permanent, long-term ownership. So in my mind, a combination, but greater need for sure on the rental supply.
I would just add that there's also a need for secure long-term rentals, and that's, a potential benefit of having a housing authority that would be able to provide that, and potentially also rent-to-own opportunities, so people who are coming in on the lower end still have an opportunity for home ownership within all of that. Thank you.
Director Martman.
Thank you. I'll just, previous directors asked some of the questions, but I have just one question it came out of attending the Housing Summit in Vancouver a couple weeks ago. And it's a question that's left with me, and it's, I think maybe to Jada. What is a house? And is everything on the table? Thank you.
Thank you, Director. Nobody has ever asked me what is a house. It's a very good question. Really, what we're looking for is shelter that is affordable, accessible, and suitable to the households that are in need of housing. So affordable, generally it's within 30% of their gross income. Accessible, it has enough bedrooms to accommodate everyone in their household, and that can be suitable as well. So that's kind of like the basic definition of what's a home and what's a shelter. Is anything on the table? Really, what we're looking to prioritize here is ensuring that we're looking at the right tools, the right housing typologies to meet the needs of the workforce. So we understand and have really good sense of the profile of who these workers are. Some of them are singles, some of them have families, some of them might have disabilities or barriers to employment, or like a physical disability, things of that nature. So that does inform the types of housing we would prioritize. I'm not sure if that answers your question, if everything is on the table, but it is important for us to ensure that even though there's many different types of housing typologies and tools, we select the right ones for this particular situation.
Quick follow-up?
Thank you. It does answer it, but I think has any work been done on looking at what currently exists in terms of under that definition of housing and the spectrum that we see across our region? Because to me, it has to do with linking, people to shelter or to whatever housing may occur. So I'm just wondering if we have an inventory at all and whether that may play into some of the decisions.
I might defer that to staff if they have an inventory. I imagine the regional housing needs report, I mean, it does summarize the universe of number of units as well as the projected need and the shortfall.
Mr. O'Riordan?
Yes, no significant additional data gathering was done besides the workforce housing survey. So the existing data is what we're going on. But we also do recognize that there are other housing typologies out there. If you're talking about tiny homes and RVs and all this, then I think that definitely can form part of the discussion. But we're here today to kind of understand the political will around things as well. So we're happy to entertain discussion around those topics to help us focus in on some of these areas.
Director Douglas?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a few questions and comments.
Pull your microphone in, please.
Yeah. How's that? Better? Just a few questions and comments. One is with regards to, just to build on some of the comments from Director Justice about really narrowing the focus a bit on certain segments of the workforce. I think there is value in looking at temporary workers. The other area that my view deserves a bit more attention would be the lower income workers as well that are having the toughest time out there in the housing market. In my view, the upper income earners, when you're getting into the $125,000 a year in annual income, I think at that level, the expectation should be that they should be in a much better position to secure housing through the market, whereas it's those lower income folks who are struggling a lot more. So again, in my perspective, I'd like to see a bit more emphasis on that area. It sounds, Mr. Reardon, like that is the plan here. The other thing is I appreciate throughout the summary of the engagement sessions, you've captured what some of the participants had to say. There are some statements made, though, that from some of the participants I don't necessarily agree with, and it's all fine and good to capture that in the summary, but it appears later on in some of the discussion papers, some of that is repeated as facts. So to give one example, some of the participants noted that there's insufficient land supply, and I think your report, Mr. Reardon, does a great job in kind of countering that after and highlighting that the municipalities, regional districts are trying to put more of an emphasis on focused growth and preventing that sprawl on the countryside. But some of these statements about insufficient supply, while they're captured in the summaries, they're kind of repeated as fact later on in some of the other reports. And if we could just, it might even just be fine tuning the language, like that there's a perception that there's a insufficient supply of land, or there's insufficient supply of, undeveloped greenfield sites for subdivisions, which I think is what those comments are getting at, is just a bit more accurate. The other bit is I'm pleased to see the focus on regulating the vacation rentals, and if there's any way the report could capture kind of the current state of things. 'Cause I think all of us around this table have anecdotes about our neighbors or our neighborhoods. You're seeing more and more of these vacation rentals going up. I don't think my neighborhood with 50 households on the street is the greatest sample size to draw any conclusions, but if there's any data you can pull together to give us a better sense of what the current problem is, I think that would be very helpful. The other bit is, the reports reference the need for increasing supply to keep up with projected population growth. One concern, though, is if you look at the stats for new housing put on the market in the region since 2016, in BC or even just in the Cowichan region. BC, it's about 38% of the new housing since 2016 has been snapped up by investors. In the Cowichan region, it's about 31%. And that creates all kind of challenges where you've got not only local workers, but folks trying to move into the region here are suddenly competing with these investors, which obviously drives up the prices and results in a lot of working people being outbid on a lot of these new housing developments. If there's any way you can kind of weave some of that analysis into the report, that would be great, because I think we all recognize the importance of speeding up development approval processes, getting that supply on the market. But if we're building more and more supply and it's all getting snapped up by some of these investors, it's obviously not going to get to the root of the problem there.
I'm going to stop you there.
Yeah, can I make one last?
Well,
point?
so here's my point. I went around the table like this, and by the time we get over to these folks over here, just.
But I'm talking so fast, though.
Well, you're talking fast, but I think it's more than reasonable for.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I'll
I'll let
touch
you
base.
finish.
I can
and
just touch base with Mr. Reardon after. It was just a comment on one aspect of it. I can just follow up offline after.
That would be perfect. And just, if I could encourage everyone to make a couple of comments, and that way, if if you have additional comments and your point hasn't been made by somebody else later on, then we can certainly come back to you. But I think that, leave some for the guy at the end there. I'll go to Director Act, and then I've got myself next.
In there? Thank you.
She had her hand up. I'm coming around.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mine is more of a question. Oh, I guess maybe kind of a comment at first. So obviously, this topic has been at our table for as long as we've all been here. And government doesn't move quickly, but I can see you're doing a lot of work for sure. And, government doesn't move quickly for some good reasons. But for the private sector, they don't always wait. So, and I saw that you've been talking to a lot of businesses and service industry owners. So are there any examples of them just taking the matter in their own hands and not waiting for housing to be provided for service workers? And do we see any examples like that happening in the region?
Thank you for the question. In our survey report, maybe my colleague Brittany will be able to pull up the numbers, but I think there was maybe a few percentage of the businesses who responded to the report who were taking certain action to support their workers, either providing them with housing when they moved here, or trying to connect them with realtors, etc. The only example I'm really aware of is Catalyst Paper, who have a program for workers when they're moving here to put them up in housing for 6 months and can extend that to 1 year or a bit longer to help with a relocation package. And they do that through one of the local agencies in town. But there are many more examples of that in other areas. So I think it's something that would be good to bring more awareness to in the future. Maybe not directly connected with this, but as a follow-up to bring awareness to opportunities around this for the region.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think that would be great because they come up with some creative solutions and can act quickly. So yeah, and it's interesting to know. Thank you.
Brittany, did you have something to add?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to cite some of the stats from the survey. We only had 3 employers state that they provide long-term subsidized housing for their employees. 1 provides long-term non-subsidized housing. We had a few more, about 9 providing short-term housing while their employees are looking for something more permanent. And we have seen some examples of employers sort of taking things into their own hands and often, I would say, partnering with developers to get some housing built that they can use for their workers. So we'd be looking to maybe encourage some more of that type of activity through this project.
And there was a minority also who were interested in partnering around building and developing housing for the workforce. So that, again, could fit into a housing authority model or a separate model of housing development for employers that got together.
Thank you, Mr. Reardon and Ms. Taylor. I go to Director Manhas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. Bassey and Mr. Reardon, for your presentation. The development community, first I'll say that I do know of 3 or 4 actually employers that do subsidize housing for their employees. They'll rent units, townhouses or other units, and then they'll subsidize the rent for their employees. And these are in the hospitality industry where they're making minimum wage or just over minimum wage. So But development community is pivoting right now from the single-family home, building single-family homes to high-density rentals, 100% rentals. I know personally myself that there's about 1,000. I talk to the developers all the time. I got another meeting this afternoon with one that's got a plan, and I know personally right now about 1,000 units in North Cowichan that are coming on board, or they want to come on board. And CMHC has been a great help with funding this, and they'll do a 50-year amortization for this area because our vacancy rate is so low. I like this report. I think it's an awesome report. It helps out with all types of housing, which is very well needed. So I'm just happy to see this report and go through to its implementation. Thanks.
Thank you. Alternate Director Salmon.
Yeah, thank you. So a quick general comment and then a question, but thank you for that. Very interesting, generally about labor shortages, and I was interested to see for decades we look at unemployment rates, but now it's the job vacancy rate that you brought up. It now doubled to 6% is the metric, so quite a change. But just further to the employer involvement part of this, I think that's really key. We actually had Director Segal and I a meeting with a developer, a big project in Mill Bay, but he on his own just brought up workforce housing and how he'd been talking to employers and as to exactly what kind of housing would be needed. So I guess just my question, is that formally built into future engagement then, work with employers or canvas employers?
Yes, absolutely. Prior to myself coming on, I know Barry and Brittany had engaged directly with employers through their employer survey. And different businesses and employers were invited in our first round of engagement. They're invited in our upcoming engagement, and we're going to invite them to respond to our final engagement, which is an online survey. So they're going to be essential targeted participants for all phases of this. And part of what we're exploring is really the role. What is the role of local government? What is the role of different sectors? And what's the role of employers? And do they have the capacity, interests, and means to potentially be involved with having and delivering employee housing or potentially managing it? So those are questions that we're asking early on because we want to understand that capacity. And if there's challenges to that, could we address it as part of this strategy report so that they can meaningfully contribute if they want to and address some of those capacity issues? So yes, Director, we are certainly engaging with them.
Okay, thank you. I just think there's big potential in the partnerships between employers and developers.
Director Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There's a couple of questions which have already been asked, but one of the ones that Director Markman brought up was what is a house? My question was what is a housing unit? Because it's just a broad brush thing, so I think that's more or less been answered. There was another remark made about existing policies, etc., being in motion. Now, what are those existing policies that are in motion? But one of the things that really concerns me is the remark about establishing a housing authority. And are we not getting into something which is outside of our core mandate here, straying outside our lanes, because it's just going to mean another layer of government to deal with? A housing authority, what does it actually mean? And the last bit is that Directors Justice and Douglas have made some good points here. Narrow the focus. We're looking at very, very broad areas and no real definition of what we're going to have. We cannot be all things to all people. I've said that before, we say it again. If we're going to do something about this, let's narrow the focus, stay on track, and not go outside, as I've heard before, outside our lanes. So basically, the establish a housing authority, what does that actually mean, Barry?
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you, Director Wilson. To give a comparison, a nonprofit housing society, if that organization would like to deliver, say, affordable housing in a community, it would have to put in a development application like any other builder or developer and go through an approvals process. Most likely, they're going to have some sort of working collaborative relationship with municipal planning staff, but they are treated as any other applicant moving through the process. If you have a housing authority and that authority is owned by the municipality, and potentially has representation on the board and maybe in staff, you effectively are closing that process gap. You are effectively moving those units through, and you traditionally what we've seen in with where housing authorities are established, that there's more certainty to the development approvals process. Things can move a lot more quickly because you're not doing a submission and review type of procedure. So it eliminates that. And the other benefit to that is senior levels of government, when they see that authority and they see that more added certainty, if this is coming from a housing authority that is municipally owned, most likely it's going to get approved. That can usually attract more dollars because those dollars want to be invested in projects that are more likely to be built at the end of the day. So we do see those funding streams typically coming in a little bit faster or more guaranteed. And that is the case that we've seen from other case studies. So I don't think it actually adds another layer of government. It actually integrates it a lot more than, say, having a separate, nonprofit housing society. So that's one aspect, Director Wilson, if that's helpful.
Yeah, follow up, please, Mr. Chair. Follow up, please, Mr. Chair.
Somebody else got my attention there for a second.
Thank you.
Please follow up.
Yeah, and I'm not fully convinced about this at all because it's just more people, more departments and everything else. Yes, we need something, but do we not already have these layers within the CVRD and within the municipalities? So I'm not really very happy about that particular one. Thank you.
Ms. Miles Wilson.
I just wanted to make a quick comment. There's mention of municipal owned, but there's also regional districts involved in this space. So that our neighbor, the Capital Regional District, would be one. And just encourage the director, they have a great website. You can check them out and they've got all their governance documents and things if you're curious of exploring this a little bit further.
Thank you. I've got Director Stone, myself, Abbott, Ishtas. Anyone else? Director Stone.
Thank you. So I had some questions and thoughts around Regional Housing Authority as well, being that I think some of our municipal partners are either on the road to establishing their own housing authorities or corporations, and whether or not, if that were to come forward, that would, at a regional level, focus on electoral area projects and opportunities. But definitely the value is there in our work with the province over the last few months in particular. It's almost not, I wouldn't say a necessity, but it sure is a leg up in developing whether it's workforce or other affordable housing opportunities in terms of that consistency, reliability, and security. And you'll even find that developers and builders will take lower margins when working with a housing authority because they know that those outcomes are assured. It cuts down on the cost of development and therefore the overhead and struggles of the development partners that might come forward. That being said, again, I'm not sure if that's something the CVRD should be looking into or if there's a duplication in the fact that the municipal governments may or may not already be a certain distance down those roads, if you will, and then how that would impact those municipal authorities versus the regional and where they would focus, but that's to be determined. But in general, I'm supportive of the concept. And I actually flagged the same thing as Director Douglas did. He took most of the stuff off my list, but was that, we have to be we have to validate the things that we hear. So opinions don't make facts. And a lot of us can sometimes come to the table with some kind of an opinion that we believe, but it needs to be validated with data So when we hear feedback from certain segments, it's just really important that we test those feedbacks rather than adopting them as policy. And the example that Director Douglas used actually was the one that I flagged as well, that it's important that we make sure we're hearing what people say. The perceptions are important. Perception may be reality to them, but we need to make sure we validate and test those assumptions before we adopt them as policy. Thanks.
Thank you for that. And so I read this report cover to cover. I found it interesting. I found that there might be some gaps in there, and I could spend an hour with you just discussing some of the points. I'm going to start with the first one. I think you whiffed on the electoral area participation in this, and I want you to go back and re-look at that. There are electoral areas that have the services that can take some of the growth and demand that's required, so please have a look at that. And, it's interesting because been here long enough to see that over the years we've really tried to nudge the development community towards different forms of housing or dwelling units, and they've always seemed to turn to the most lucrative, the single-family dwelling. And at one point, I think Cowichan Green Community with the units above their facility had created more affordable housing than all the governments in the Cowichan Valley with one building. So, I think it may take a little bit more than a nudge. And at the Housing Summit, we heard the average cost of building at $350 a square foot. So if 1,000 square foot home would be $350,000 to build, and a 2,000 square foot home would be $700,000 to build, if you add $500,000 on there for a lot inside an urban setting, you're not affordable any longer. So I'm going to echo what some of the speakers have said and the directors have said around the table. I think the folks in the higher income brackets can do just fine for the most part. But it's the people that are getting squeezed out, and you've touched on it. It's the short-term rentals, and I'm going to use it again. It's hollowing out some of our communities. So I would say we need to push on that. I've heard the anecdotal stories. They're not backed up by fact, but every second home in some of the recreational communities, folks can make in excess of what they would make in a year in a long-term rental in a 2-month in the summer. And that's where some of the long-term rental market is going, is to the short-term rental, Airbnb, the like. So I think a lot of focus has to go there. I'll stop there. And we'll go to, and I don't need a comment, and I'd love to follow up after the fact. We now have Director Abbott.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to hitchhike on Director Martman's idea about what is a house, and I'd ask EDC and consultants you engage to consider some creative ideas. I'm a firm believer in using assets in place. Specifically, we have a hospital that's going to become available. We have the Ramada Inn that is currently closed. We have retail box stores unused at the Commons in what was formerly the Rona. It seems to be a storage facility. It's a hot button topic across this country, using retail space. I think we can deal with urgency. Of course, this plan can continue, but I think we could take advantage of space that already exists and pivoting it into accommodation. Thank you.
Thank you. To Director Istash.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And real quick to Director Abbott on that point of commercial spaces. Look at the City of Calgary's strategy with their decrease through the downturn in commercial spaces in downtown Calgary. They're at 25% vacancy, I believe. They actually implemented a strategy, and it's actually one of the premier ones in North America of converting retail and commercial space to residential. So there is a governance model in place there. That might be something to look at. Mr. Chair, I was just going to touch base real quick that the scope is really important here and the words used. So to echo Councillor Justice as the first speaker, I possibly be rounding it out now, saying that the labeling of the strategy is great, and I appreciate what it is, but to me, when I read through this, this is a market housing strategy, which is great, and it's showing the entire spectrum of housing we required at the market level. When I see the word workforce housing, I look at my 20 years in the oil field industry, and workforce housing was anything from the company I worked for owned a fourplex in the one community, so whenever I was in town, I stayed in the fourplex. When I was in downtown Calgary, they had an apartment waiting for me. And in some communities, it was a work camp. So when I see workforce housing, it's those type of things that are directly to, here in this community would have been something, whereas the CVRD would have created a temporary use permit and opened up a work camp, which would be supporting the hospital, would be supporting all the tradespeople that are building countless residential developments, and then the police station, and then the school, and then there's so many other big, even, I believe it was Ladysmith possibly deferred a capital project just because there's no workforce. So when I see workforce strategy, that's truly what it is. I just don't want to see in here where we're calling it a workforce strategy when really this is a really good market strategy on the entire spectrum and continuum of housing, so that development community can come to the Cowichan Valley and pick the right thing to build. But and then lastly to what Councilor Justice said again, not overlap the good work going on with attainable housing and social housing. Those things are happening already, so we just keep piling all these different things into another report. So really, I see no problem with a market housing strategy, which this is, and that market means my employees that I'm doing my best and I can only pay $19 an hour so they can afford housing, but to other people that are making $50 an hour. So everybody needs housing, but this looks like everybody has a job. So it's just calling this a workforce housing strategy when it's just talking about our wide demographic of residents in the Cowichan Valley. Just the scope of the strategy. That's what I wanted to touch on. Thank you for the time, Chair.
Thank you. Any comment? No, go to Director Staples.
Thank you, and thanks for all the work on this and bringing it forward. It's very echoey for some reason. No, it's okay. And one of the things I guess that I'd like to just sort of comment on is to add to what's being said, is sort of that notion of a home that was brought up at that conference and that was brought up by Director Martman, and the need for us to really look at doing that. And I don't want to say look at doing that, because I don't want us to look at it for 2 more years while we just keep increasing the need, but to actually go, there's a lot of other opportunities, a lot of other options for housing that aren't traditional, and let's start to look at those. I just sent some of the mayors earlier at UBCM on tiny homes, the response from the government. And so, looking at their response, which is essentially as long as it's compliant with safety, that there doesn't seem to be an issue, even though there seems to be an issue. So I think that there's a lot of things that we can do really effectively, really quickly, to add to the housing stock that we need, even in a temporary way for all different demographics of people. And also to look at what came up at AVICC as well, and this is the CVRD is a good table to do this, around that farm housing and the availability of the challenges with ALR and the housing units allowed on ALR, and looking at some sort of temporary project or pilot or whatever we want to call it, to look at how we can optimize a certain percentage of ALR lands to actually bring in workforce housing, not just for the farms, but also needed for the community, and not taking over the ALR land, which is always the concern, but a percentage of that land being allocated for farming. Otherwise, we're going to lose more farmers. It's 40% in the next few years. And so to start to build those things into this as well, because I lived on a 365-acre farm, and you're allowed one 5,000 square foot house. Well, you can't run a farm that way. But we could have taken 5 acres of that farm and actually created a community that could have helped farm and also helped the community housing needs. So I think that those are the things that we need to actually just start implementing and doing quickly. We don't have time to continue to look at what we need to do. We need to start trying some of the things that we know are out there and see what happens. And like someone said earlier, I think it was Watershed Board, we're going to get some things wrong and then we'll try other things, and that's fine. But right now we're getting way too much wrong and we're not trying enough. So thank you.
Thank you, Director Staples. And seeing no other people on the list, I'd give Mr. O'Riordan or Ms. Bassi an opportunity to conclude, and we'll move on to our next bits. Anything further?
Mr. Chair, yeah, I just appreciate all the comments from the directors. This is very helpful for this stage in the process. I definitely hear narrowing down the scope and having it focus is a priority. And also ensuring that what's being put forward is truly addressing the workforce and that there's really good evidence and data that supports it. So I really appreciate all the comments. Thank you.
Mr. O'Riordan?
Yeah, I think this was a really good discussion to help us narrow our focus or broaden our focus depending on how things are going. So I really appreciate all the comments and the discussion we had today, and I look forward to the next round of engagements, which I invite you all to participate in, because that will be really important as part of this, not just to be at this table, but to be in community with other stakeholders to continue this work and have those more nuanced discussions with other stakeholders part of this. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Excellent report. I'm just being conscious of the time and know that we have to go to question period and closed session and maybe eat and start another meeting soon. So with that, thank you, Mr. O'Riordan, Ms. Bassi, and Ms. Mohan, our next item.
So there is no unfinished business or new business, Mr. Chair, and so we are on to question period.
Invite those in the gallery to pose a question to the chair.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. I promise to be brief. In regards to temporary workers, and I can see that at the new hospital site, maybe somebody can answer it. Do they have temporary housing on site there? There's an awful lot of trailers there.
I would have to get back to you on that.
Okay. And that brings up my point about temporary housing for big projects. You see that a lot in industry, and that may be a good idea for the farming who rely on itinerant workers, and it could spawn a new business, is to have itinerant housing that doesn't need to be serviced, like with water, that they, much like the movie industry, they have trailers that come in, they have people that service them, and then they move off. So could that be a possibility to be taken into consideration in this housing?
So thank you for that question, and there's a lot of information contained in the report, and I'll just give you an anecdote from the Housing Summit. There's a lot of changes coming forward, whether it be housing that can move around on wheels or the provincial imposition of 3 or 4 plexes on single-family homes. And there was one thought that kept running through my mind as I heard these announcements coming. It's kind of rude, but where does all the liquid waste go? And, a septic system that's been designed for a single-family home on a lot in a rural area might be hard-pressed to accept 4 units. And are the municipal liquid waste facilities able to contain, or are able to receive the additional effluent that would flow to them? And if they are mobile units and people are living in them in an itinerant situation in regards to their work, they have to find adequate spots to empty their holds. So
Yep.
it's a very complex question.
It is. And just to or Director Martman's statement, and I heard from others too, is the tiny house and RVs. The RVs are not built, and that's recognized by the province to be lived in year-round. Tiny homes do not currently meet BC building codes. That's a provincial matter. And
Your question?
well, the question is, we see the proliferation of these in our communities without permits. We see sometimes 2, 3 tiny homes on properties. Is the CDRD going to do anything to help manage this unregulated, unpermitted use? Thank you.
Simple answer, and bringing a whole bunch of thoughts and ideas into this and reports that we've had, I think it is yes. And I'll leave it at that.
Thank you.
Ms. Mohan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe that the next item on the agenda would be a motion to go into, that the meeting be closed to the public in accordance with the Community Charter, Part 4, Division 3, Section 90, subsection 1E, as noted in accordance with the agenda.
Before we do that, before I take a motion, when are we scheduled to start our next meeting?
I believe that 12:30 is the schedule for the closed session, and then subsequently, the regular board meeting is at the regular time, which is 1:30.
Perfect. Can I have a motion to move and close? Moved, seconded. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? We will move into close and let's